This video is about the World of Tanks Tech Tree. You click on the button over here that says Tech Tree. With the current version, it will show you if there's any branches that have any discounts. In this case, it says Special On Track, and it mentions Germany and Sweden. So there's a lot to talk about with these tech trees, and it's very difficult to cover everything. I don't know the ordering of the tech trees, but I will say that it changes order over the years. The ones at the top tend to be the ones that have the most branches, and not only that, the top 5 nations are the only ones that have SPG, which are artillery units, and the remaining nations do not. The top branches, the top nations have the most branches and have the most vehicles, and the bottom nations do not. They have far fewer, in some cases only one branch. So there's 5 different classes. You have the artillery, tank destroyer, heavy tank, medium tank, and light tank. Some nations have 1 of each, and some nations might have 2 of each, and some nations only might have 1 branch. But the most basic branch is the heavy tank. And the reason why is because as tanks became more modern, the engines became powerful enough, and the guns became powerful enough, and the armor was strong enough that they just all became heavy tanks. And in the beginning, they tended to be considered light tanks because they had weaker engines, less powerful guns, and weaker armor. In terms of all the nations, which is a good starting point, you usually want to stick with one of the top 5. The Russian nation has the most options in terms of branches. It has way more than the other countries as compared to something like Czechoslovakia, which only has 1. So what will end up happening is, in terms of your crew, you'll end up with a lot more crew members in the Russian nation, because obviously the vehicles have crew that operate the vehicles, and you're going to end up with a nice collection of crew members. And when you play with some of these other nations, you're going to have shortages of crew members here and there. The other thing is, obviously, the best vehicles are usually in the top tech trees. However, the other tech trees of the smaller nations usually have a few good vehicles here and there. However, in general, when you look at a smaller nation, an entire branch is usually not perfect. Like, they might have 1 vehicle, like the Udis 03 is a really good vehicle, but when you go to the larger nations, you could have an entire branch that could be really nice to play, like the T-28 and the T-95 and the T-110-03. You know, this is a good line right here for tank destroyers. So I'm going to start getting into more. Oh, the other thing we have are obviously premium vehicles, but keep in mind these are not all the premium vehicles. At the top over here, there's something called the collector vehicle, and the collector vehicles has some of the vehicles in the lower branches like Tier 2 and Tier 3, and some of the 9s and 10s, and some of what used to be a crossover. Like, there used to be a vehicle that would go from one branch to another. Those vehicles went into the collectors. And you don't need to research them. Once you get to Tier 4, you automatically can purchase any of the Tier 3 vehicles. So with the American Tech Tree, you're going to notice we've got the SPG line, which is actually a very good SPG line. This is, I would say, overall the best SPG line, meaning that every vehicle along the line is going to be good to play. You're not going to get that with the other tech trees. For example, in Germany, I would say in general they're pretty good for the SPGs. But with Russia, it's a whole different story. With Russia, you've got some of these like the S-51, and it's very difficult to play. It's one of the most difficult tanks to play in the game. And then with the British ones, the lower ones are very difficult to play. And with the French one, you know, they're okay, but the Tier 10 is a really interesting and unique vehicle. In terms of tank destroyers, as I said before, usually you have 2 lines. One is a well-armored tank destroyer line, and the other one is for mobility. In the case of the United States, it's not entirely true. The United States tank destroyers are well armored in the higher tiers and weaker armored in the lower tiers. When we look at Germany, we're going to see that we got a well armored line going up to the Jagdpanzer E100, and we have a weaker, faster, more mobile line going up to the Grill 15. Russia has the same. They have rear-mounted guns with frontal engines, and then they've got the strong armor of this other line going up to the Object 268. But don't be fooled. Even though these have engines in the front, often the armor is pretty good because of the way the tank is designed. The British use a lightly armored, highly mobile line, and they have a well-armored line going up to the Badger. The French use high mobility, which is common in French vehicles in general. There are some exceptions, but in general, France has highly mobile vehicles. And France also has a lot of autoloaders. Usually, if you're looking at Tier 6 or greater, you're going to find lots of autoloaders, which means that you can fire multiple rounds in your clip, and then you have a long reload. No tank destroyers. Japan has a tank destroyer line, but it has not been published yet, which means you cannot play it on the PC version as of today, but I believe it's been released on the console version. This is the Chinese line of tank destroyers. They tend to do high damage. Tank destroyers in general, high penetration, and I guess they have decent armor. And for these other lines, Sweden has high penetration tank destroyers, and they have a unique design, which means that they tend to not have turrets, and they have something called the siege mode. Very difficult to learn how to play, but they have a lot of advantages because of the high penetration. So then you get into the heavy tanks. In the case of the US, you have one line. I would say it's a good line. I like playing all of the US heavy tanks, although the T-29 has an issue where the T-29 to the T-32, the gun is not, you don't get a balanced gun in both tiers. And Germany has very interesting heavy tanks. You've got super heavy tanks, in this case, rear turreted frontal engine. You've got super heavy tanks with spaced armor, thick spaced armor. And then you've got some heavy tanks that are a little bit more mobile. They've got three lines. On the top end, they're all very good. On the way up, maybe not so much. I think the Maushin and the Maus line is probably the most fun to play. But, some players don't play it. If they don't like the amount of damage it does, they just won't play the vehicle, even if it might be more fun to play, because some players are more concerned with specific specifications. I happen to be not so concerned. So then you have the Russian heavy tanks. There's a lot of options on Russian heavy tanks. If you like slow, well-armored vehicles, and you like city maps and things like that, you're going to want to play the Russian and perhaps German tanks. So you have the IS-7 line, and then you've got the rear-mounted for the 705A. You've got the IS-4 line. You've got double-barrel vehicles, which literally has two barrels, and you could fire both at the same time. And in the collector's vehicles, you might find a few more vehicles. Obviously, there's a lot of premium heavy tanks. Under Britain, you've got a very unique line. They tend to have a fast reload and lower damage, which is different than the other nations, which tend to have a longer reload and higher damage, and they tend to have a lot of spaced armor, well armored in the lower tiers. The French line, you've got a line that has autoloaders, which means you can fire rapidly and then you have a long reload. And then they've got a well-armored line. France has an issue with heavy tanks where they tend to be relatively slow. You have to upgrade the engine in order to really enjoy playing the tank. So when you play a heavy tank in general, you want to make sure you do whatever you can to upgrade your engine as fast as possible, because otherwise the vehicles are just too slow. Japan has super heavy tanks along the majority of the line, the OI up to the Type 5 Heavy. These vehicles have spaced armor. They have a lot of armor. They're very well defended. They used to be very overpowered, but they got nerfed many years ago. And they tend to, people tend to play them with high explosive rounds. But unfortunately, after they reduced the performance, the vehicles just aren't as good as they used to be. And unfortunately, I played them after the performance was reduced. Chinese vehicles are usually similar to Soviet Union vehicles. So a lot of these, like the IS-2 is a Russian vehicle, the 110 is nearly identical, and the WZ-111, they're nearly identical to the Russian vehicles. However, because of the way they balance the game, the WZ-111 5A and the 113, which is a collector, used to be the top heavy tanks in the game, although now with the rebalancing, it's a little bit different. They do have an issue where they catch on fire easily when damaged from the front, so you have to be aware of that when you plan your crew and when you pick various modules. Polish heavy tanks do a lot of damage, especially at the higher tiers. 750 damage is really good. They've got really good armor because of the way they've evened out the balance for all the tanks. They are very similar in playstyle to the Russian-style tanks in the higher tiers. Sweden uses autoloaders. These vehicles are a little bit smaller because you need less space for the loader, and the shape of the turret is a little bit different, so it has a bigger slope to it, which means that they can use weaker armor. That's an example of what it looks like. And, they're fun to play. I haven't gotten to play them as much as I want to, but if you like playing hull-down positions and you like autoloaders, you're probably going to enjoy playing those tanks. The Italian tanks just came out within the past few months. They are auto reloaders, which means you can either use the autoloader mechanism or you can fire them like a regular tank. They have spaced armor, however, the armor is not that strong. The Tier 10, I believe, is the best vehicle of the line. However, the mediums have a much better reputation. The Italian heavy tanks, fun to play, but specification-wise, not that great. So then we're going to get into the medium tanks. American medium tanks have a unique style. They tend to look like this. And in some cases, I get good games with them, but they're not my favorite line. However, the T69 line is a line of autoloaders going up to the T57 Heavy. These are really fun tanks to play because of the auto-loading mechanism. Germany has the Panther line and the Leopard line. And there's people, I have good games with the Panther. I don't really enjoy playing them, but like I said, I still get good games. And the E50M, it's one of the popular medium tanks in the game. The Leopard used to be the lowest performing medium tank, but then they buffed it to equalize it, and it's got a lot of nice specifications in it in terms of penetration and high explosive rounds and things like that. So the German medium tanks, we've got one line that has decent armor, and we've got another one that has better mobility. The Russian medium tanks, you've got a lot of options. You've got this line over here going up to the Object 140. You've got the rear-mounted tanks, and in the collector's vehicles, you've probably got a lot of options. You've got the 430U, and you've got, obviously, premium tanks. I'm not a big fan of Russian medium tanks. However, I have great games with rear-mounted turrets in general because I'm really good at angling them. And the top-tier Russian tanks have a really good reputation. So there's a lot of good players that play these top-tier medium tanks. And I haven't put any games. I haven't bought these Tier 10 vehicles yet. The Object 416, one of the worst tanks in the game. Very difficult to play. Britain has a very unique medium tank line. This is a lot of people really love the British medium tanks. However, they are way better in the lower tiers, such as the Cromwell. And as you get higher, the enjoyment factor goes down dramatically. The Cromwell is considered one of the top tier 6 tanks in the game. There's a lot of people who'll just immediately tell you this is the best tier 6 tank in the game. And there's some people who have said that this is their favorite vehicle in the game. They're highly mobile. In the upper tiers, one of the issues, longer reload, which is the opposite of the heavy tanks, and perhaps more damage. France has auto-loading medium tanks, and they've got a style of vehicle that's like the Leopard, weak armor. And the autoloaders in general, all autoloaders in general have lower penetration than other vehicles to balance them out. But autoloaders are fun to play. The Batchat 25T, for me, it was just an easy tank to play. Everything just went so smoothly with this vehicle. Czechoslovakia, I really don't like this style of tank. Now I don't mind so much, but I was never a big fan of it. But when you get up into the higher tiers, you start to get the option of having an autoloader, and the TVP is one of the top vehicles in the game in terms of the type of ammunition and how quickly it reloads. There's a lot of top players that play these tanks, and when I see these on the battlefield, I'm very cautious about how I approach it because they're very dangerous tanks. The Japanese medium tanks, they've got their own unique design. I have good games with them. I believe that the higher tier vehicle now it has a special siege mode mechanism. You can see it's marked over here with the tracks, which allows the vehicle to lean in. I get good games with these. The Chinese medium tanks do not have a good reputation, although the 121 is going to be way better than the lower tier vehicles. They don't have a good reputation because the aim time is quite high. They're a little clunky. I play these for hit and run. You got to get close to the enemy. You get behind them, blast them in the rear, run away. And they might have a long reload time. Poland has 2 lines of mediums, or like a partial line and a complete line. And the top Polish vehicle has a special engine, a turbine engine. I haven't played the Polish tanks, but I think that the way that they're designed, I mean, you can look at the design and see that, it looks like a well-designed medium tank, although, like I said, I haven't played it yet. I do like playing the Polish tanks, however, they don't have a reputation for dominating anything in the game. Swedish medium tanks have a good reputation. These vehicles have a special mode that allows them to lean in, which means the front of the vehicle can kneel down. And they've got a really nice angle. You're going to bounce a lot of shots, especially it is a high learning curve. You have to learn how to play it properly. And, these things can do a lot of damage. You don't want to come up against one of these and have it blast you. Let's see what this does. 360 damage. A lot of medium tanks are not up in the 360 number. It's more on the high side. Big learning curve. The Progetto medium tanks are considered, the Italian mediums are considered some of the best in the game. Not because of penetration, but because of the auto reloading system. They're very, very popular vehicles. They're similar to the Leopard and they're similar to the French AMX-30, but because of the loading system on the gun, you can end up having really good games and a lot of fun. And a lot of the top players do play these vehicles, but there is an issue, of course, with the armor. Although the Tier 8 Pantera does have decent armor, and it might be one of the best armored Tier 8 medium tanks. So now we're going to move into light tanks. The American light tanks are, you know, they're okay. They're good speed. They're a little top heavy. Like you can look at this design and look at what it looks like. It's not a squat tank. I prefer the squat tank, low profile tanks. And I don't like driving the Sheridan. I used to have it and I sold it. But the Sheridan is also one of the vehicles with the highest view range in the game, one of the top two. So if you're doing spotting missions and you want to outspot anybody, this would be one of the two you would pick. The T-49 is a very fun tank. The T-71, I haven't played enough of some of these. German light tanks, not a big fan of. The design of these vehicles is a little awkward, as you can see. So you're going to have issues. You're going to be worried about tipping over and things like that. The RU-251 used to be the fastest vehicle in the game. They slowed it down a little bit after Frontline came out, when the wheeled vehicles came out. But the Ryman Panzer Wagon, again, this is the vehicle with the best spotting range, and you can dominate just by playing that vehicle. Some of the lower tier light tanks for Germany are amazing, like the Leopard and the Lux and these little Panzers. A lot of fun to play with the lower tiers. Some of the lower tier vehicles have autoloaders. A lot of fun to play. I forgot the name of the gun. Autocannon. And some of them have really strong armor. I don't remember because M2 is used on like maybe 4 different tanks for different countries. But when I see M2, I worry about the armor. The German light tanks, lower tiers, a lot of fun. I do not like the Russian low tier light tanks. The BT line, the guns, aim weird. Some of the vehicles, like the T60, are hard to drive. T-54 lightweight used to be the most popular light tank in the game. I do love the T-100 LT, but a lot of these vehicles like this MT-25, they're just a little goofy. Britain, I like the British light tanks. I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of people don't. The advantage is the high explosive rounds. It's a little weird playing the G-SOR and the LHMTV. I love the Covenanter with the little pom-pom guns. But the Manticore is one of the smallest vehicles in the game. It doesn't have a good view range, but it is fun to play. France has the best light tanks. If you're going to play light tanks, you want to play French. You've got a wheeled line and you got an autoloader line. And the ELC used to be one of the greatest vehicles in the game. The Lynx 6x6 is extremely fun to play, and the EBR 105 is the fastest vehicle in the game, although I haven't had enough time to play it. High learning curve with wheeled vehicles, and there's a bit of a learning curve with the autoloaders. But you can't go wrong with French light tanks, and you get pretty much everything with the premium French light tanks. We do have light tanks on the Chinese line. I know you might think China couldn't possibly make good light tanks. They absolutely do. The Chinese light tanks are a lot of fun to play. I don't judge them based on their specifications or whether you're going to get a high win rate. I judge them based on how much I enjoy playing them. And the premium light tanks like the Type 64 and the 62 are really fun tanks to play. Everything about them, the gun loading, the aiming, the mobility, just works out well. Okay, are there any vehicles? I'm going to go through vehicles. I'm going to skip the premium vehicles for this particular video. Vehicles that are iconic, the T95, definitely. This is a vehicle that a lot of people love to play, and they have a lot of fun with, and it's feared on the battlefield. I happen to enjoy the T-49. That's why I got rid of the Sheridan and dropped down to the T-49. Great tank. Some of these vehicles used to be really good, but then other vehicles displaced them. The T-29 had a reputation for having the strongest turret armor. I believe the M44 is the tech tree vehicle that earns the most credits. The Hellcat is extremely popular. Panzer E100, very popular, very iconic. Grill 15 is popular, haven't played it yet. The mouse is iconic. E100, they're vehicles that you're going to want to play someday. I would even say the Jag Tiger 8.8 is one of my most played vehicles. For Russia, KV2, which is right here, very, very popular tank. People used to enjoy the KV1S. I don't hear people talking about it anymore. Maybe they took the derp gun away. I had great games with the T150. I love the Object 261. The 2684 is amazing, and the 268 is amazing. I'm looking forward to playing the 705A. The ST2 is a fun tank to play. In terms of mediums, you'll have to ask someone else for advice. I love the T100 LT. SU-152, good reputation. FV-304 used to be very fun to play, but now it's just kind of an average tank. Conqueror Gc is very popular because of the high gun arc. FV-4005, one of the top tanks in the game. Badger, one of the best armored tanks in the game. There's people that love the Super Conqueror. I happen to not like it. I love the Manticore. The Tortoise is an iconic vehicle. I did not get to enjoy it because I had to rush through it in one day. I love the Churchill lines and the Matilda, but there's a lot of people that don't like them because they are very slow. France, you've got Autoloader, the Foch, the Batchat, which a lot of people say they hate it. I love it. But the problem is they nerf it so that it's more difficult to play. The AMX 50B, amazing tank. This line is fun. The Batchat line is fun. These are all great, and these are mostly great. You definitely want to eventually play the TVP T5051. I would definitely say Type 5 Heavy. Anywhere along this line, there's a lot of people that don't like them, maybe because they don't like getting shot by them. But they are fearsome tanks. They, like I said, used to be very overpowered. I don't know about these Chinese tanks because I haven't really had a chance to play them. But my guess is that if you like tank destroyers, you're probably going to like playing them. But they get a bad reputation because none of these tanks were real vehicles. I believe that they're completely manufactured from the imagination of the game developers. Like, I don't even think they were planned designs. WZ-111 used to be a top vehicle. Now it's more so-so. And I love the 5916. It might even be an autoloader. 121 I haven't played yet, but I see a lot in the game, which means it must be popular. These 50 TPs and 60 TPs, they're tough opponents. So they must, they do a lot of damage, and you will be surprised because you expect to get hit for 400, and then somebody hits you for 750. That's why these tanks are cool. These Polish mediums are unique, but they're not very popular as far as I know. The Udis's high learning curve, I would say definitely Kronwagen is a great line to go through. STRVs and Udis tank destroyers, high learning curve. And keep in mind, with this line of vehicles, there's people that just only play this tank because of its super high penetration. High learning curve, difficult to play. Again, with the Progetto, great line to play. The Italian heavy tanks, not so much. Which countries overall stick to the top 5? Light tanks, French. Medium tanks, you might want to go to British or Russian. Heavy tanks, I strongly recommend Russia for the general purpose heavy tanks. Germany for super heavy, well-armored tanks that might do higher damage. USA for kind of a mixture. I think that they're good. A lot of options with heavy tanks. In general, I enjoy the United States line for heavy tanks, tank destroyer, SPG, all good. Medium, a little bit less. Light tank, a little bit less. Germany, you got to mix because you got to deal with the weird German engineering, but the SPGs are good. Tank destroyers good. Heavy tanks are good in the higher tiers. Medium tanks, maybe they're better now. Light tanks, not so much. Russia has the reputation for the heavy tanks, and they got a reputation for medium tanks. SPGs is going to be a difficult haul going through here. Tank destroyers, excellent. And then Britain, best tank destroyers in the game. There's people that like the heavy tanks here, and a lot of people complain about the light tanks, but I think that they're decent. Britain is kind of more of a mix. France is good for autoloaders, the higher tiers. They're going to have weaker armor. So if you don't know where to start out, I would say go American or go Russian. Lots of options. Now there's another strategy. Should you go deep or wide? I went wide, which means I played all the tier 1s and then all the tier 2s and all the tier 3s and then all the tier 4s. And what happens is everyone's going to make fun of you because they're going to say you're a bad player. If you go deep, it's a different strategy. If you go deep, you play the best tank line, you win tons of games, and everybody thinks you're a great player. But then you haven't played all the horrible tanks, so you don't know how to play the horrible tanks. I know how to play every tank in the game. And there's a lot of players that they have good stats, but they're just playing the overpowered line. You decide. You decide what you want to do. I don't care. Now you have more choice. We didn't have it back then. In terms of crossover, should you cross over? Sometimes you have to. Okay, if you got any questions or comments, please post below.